Welcome to the Afternoon Auto Group Braves Plus pregame show on 1470 and 100.3 WMBD. I'm your host, Chad Klein. Bradley looks to get back on track in the friendly confines of Carver Arena against 8-7 Drake University. I continue my conversation with sports attorney Mitch Gilfillan and Home of the Brave board member Joe Messmore. We will be discussing what the NCAA is getting right versus what they're getting wrong, revenue sharing, and generating revenue. All next on the Afternoon Auto Group Braves Plus pregame show on 1470 and 100.3 WMBD. This is the Afternoon Auto Group Braves Plus pregame show on 1470 and 100.3 WMBD. I'm talking to Joe Messmore, NIL Collective Home of the Brave, and Mitch Gilfillan, attorney at Quinn Johnston in Peoria. And you made this point in our last conversation, Joe, a few weeks ago. 5 years, athletes playing 4 or 5 years in 5 different programs. There is no way that student is on track to graduate. And speaking to that point, these are still student athletes. And that's where one area where I think the NCAA needs to get it right is to remember what the core function is. Because I don't know what the stat is now, but it used to be like 97% of all athletes don't go on to play a pro sport.
It was a commercial they ran every March Madness.
Yeah. And they probably still play it to this day. And that stat may have changed a little bit, but it's like 97, 98% never play a professional sport.
Right.
To some degree, we're losing that in all of this conversation.
I completely agree with you. And, the point of college always was and should still be to earn a degree so you can set yourself up for the next 40 to 50 years of your life. Because the reality of it is that stat is so true that so few go professional in sports is that you come out of college at 23, 24, 25, you have a long life ahead of you. And when you've been handed this, bag of money through NIL or revenue sharing, and all of a sudden you got to go work a 9-to-5 job, and you may not make that much your first year or two, and it's always not guaranteed because you have to show up and perform. I think that's setting up the next generation for some unwanted expectations.
It's setting them up for failure because, we can talk about it at our level. I'm not going to talk numbers, but if you're giving a kid, let's say $20,000, seems like a lot of money to them. A lot, especially for
it is
a
for
good
a
portion of, especially for some of these kids coming from lower income, and they all of a sudden go spend it on frivolous things and things, and they don't understand there's an end point to that.
Absolutely.
Right. And then it's like, what now? And they didn't plan. And some of those, again, we're talking about a small percentage of these players that are getting these numbers that are maybe set for life if they want to be. Mm-hmm. But that's very, very few. You're probably talking, under 100 at most.
And because I've seen NIL contracts, not just in the Missouri Valley, but across the country, Mountain West, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, is a lot of that money is front-loaded in the beginning. And so you're giving these student athletes, 10 to 15 to some $50,000 before they ever even step foot on campus. And what does that, unless you're getting a signing bonus from your future employer, that's not reality.
Right. Yeah.
And we all know that now in the work field. Like, you got to show up and you earn your money when the month ends.
And
you have to perform.
Perform, one, and number two, some of those valuations I think are skewed because it's a valuation of, I forget how you explain this, Joe, in the NIL contract. When someone says they're getting $1 million, they're not always getting $1 million. It's what the value of that asset is determined to be, like a rental or a lease or something along that line. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, yeah, and I think that's what's negotiated with the student athlete themselves. And so depending on if it's installment payments, depending on what it may be, every athlete has a value to them. Your cross-country athlete may have a value of $500, and that's important for that cross-country athlete. The star basketball player may have an NIL value of $250,000. Depending on how that money is given, the contract can say sometimes when that money will be paid. And so it not always is guaranteed. For example, if you enter the transfer portal at Christmas time, what should allow you to be entitled to the remainder part of your contract that you never fulfilled? And so that's why it's important, I think, too, for this next phase of NIL is to make sure you have adequate representation and contracts are in place.
And we've had guys throughout the years that we've had a parent ask us to make smaller, more frequent payments to them so that they're not getting a big because they didn't trust them not
so
to.
Fast.
Yeah, and on the other hand, we've had that want everything right up front, and which we've never done. But it's kind of all personality. We have guys who have probably still have every dollar we ever paid them 5 years later, and we've got guys who blow it the day that they get the check.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, we will be back on the Afternoon Auto Group Braves Plus pregame show on 1470 and 100.3 WMBD. This is the Uftreen Auto Group Braves Plus pregame show on 1470 and 100.3. I'm speaking with Joe Messmore, NIL Collective, home of the Brave, and Mitch Gilfill, an attorney at Quinn Johnston here in Peoria. We've had some of these conversations already early on about, eligibility, players being played, but the ultimate thing about this, the funny thing about this is we are teetering as college sports go of what's the difference between NIL versus pay for play or revenue sharing NIL and pay for play. I know we talk about it as, it's NIL, it's all, but is it?
Yeah, here's the thing, is revenue sharing with schools is straight pay for play. It does not have to be reported to anybody. Okay. There's no third-party arm.
That's the first I've heard the actual, we admit what it is.
It is. It absolutely is. There's no enforcement guidelines around revenue sharing. Let's take a school like the University of Tulsa. If Tulsa wants to revenue share $8 million out of the $20.5 million cap that they're allowed to, because, again, they don't have the $20 million to share. Mm-hmm. Let's say they have 8. Maybe that they do. If they want to share that $8 million with basketball, football, and then they spread it across 5 or 6 other sports, it is their prerogative to pay any athlete any dollar that they want to. If Tulsa wants to go get the number one quarterback in the country and spend $3 million on that quarterback alone and revenue share with that quarterback, they are allowed to. There's no challenge to that whatsoever.
So let's go back to what you talked about, the limitation of the revenue sharing. It's $20.5 million.
$20.5 million.
Is that across all sports? Is that by sport?
All sports.
All sports. So I'm going to use a big school like a Texas, for instance, football. Archie Manning, $7 million. Everybody knows roughly what he's. So that means there's only $13 million left, roughly, for everything else. That's just on the revenue sharing side, though, correct?
Let me break that down for you, because I actually disagree with that. So if there's $20.5 million to share at Texas, a lot of schools are using the model of 75, 15, 10, 5. 5-5. So what that means is 75% of that $20.5 million goes to football.
Oh, wow.
So we're talking 13 to $14 million. 15% of that $20.5 million goes to men's basketball.
Gotcha.
So now we're at 10% left, basically, to go to 5% to women's basketball and 5% to 17 other sports. Okay? So you see where the lion's share of money is going. So when you say Archie Manning's making $7 million, keep in mind, football at Texas may only have $13 to $14 million to share from a revenue standpoint.
Sure.
Archie Manning could be making, or the Manning kid could be making $2 million or $1 million in revenue sharing, but they're supplementing that through NIL. That's the difference there. And then that's where the arm comes into play, that you have to have that NIL approved by the third-party arm known as the College Sports Commission, which is the NIL Go website. That's the difference.
And Arch Manning is one of those guys, one of the rare extremes.
Correct.
He actually has a value in his name.
Correct.
Because of his grandfather, his parents, his cousin or uncle.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to take anything away from that at all. I'm just trying to understand how that breakdown occurs.
Yeah.
Which you bring up an interesting point about the NIL versus revenue sharing. The College Sports Commission has put a limitation of $600. So anything over $600 has to go through the NIL Go, correct?
Correct, exactly.
Why was that number chosen? I mean, it just seems so small.
It's chosen because of the IRS.
Okay.
And so anything over $600 is IRS reportable, arguably income.
Okay.
And so that's the threshold. And so there are a lot of schools that will pay their tennis, soccer, cross country, pickleball, whatever it may be, $500, and then it has to be reported.
I gotcha.
And we can laugh about it, but that's the reality of what they do. It's anything over that number has to go through the NIL Go website, which is their deal, their contract has to be submitted and ultimately approved. It gets approved in two ways. One, it has to fit that the actual value is worthwhile for what the student athlete should be getting paid. So you have to kind of prove what their value is. And two, it has to be within the range of compensation for your geographical area, your year in college, everything that you bring to the table. So, for example, a kid in Peoria, Illinois, and their range of compensation is a lot different than a kid living in Miami, Florida.
I mean, in some ways, it's got to be much more difficult for a Peoria person versus that Miami player because the opportunities just aren't there.
100%. And this comes down to corporate sponsorships. And I do have a couple quotes that I brought here. So the Syracuse athletic director talked about this, and he said not every Power 4 school is sharing $20.5 million.
Sure.
The thing that is absolutely critical, he says, is the way the House settlement is constructed with formation of the CSC is corporate support. And so he says, if we get corporate support we need, we will be fine. And so that comes into play with local businesses, the Molly Maids of the world, those businesses that need to come forward locally.
Shameless plug there.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. To help college sports in their community.
Sure.
And so think about it. In the Peoria community, let's say there's 2,000 businesses, and I'm talking the surrounding communities too, within a 25-mile radius. If Bradley University or any other university kind of within their geographical location can get those 1,000 to 2,000 corporate sponsorships to all give $1,000 to $5,000, and I know not everybody can do that.
Right.
You're talking millions of dollars that can come into play, and that can be used to take care of a school's athletic department. Because I'm telling you right now, and I'm not just talking about Missouri Valley schools. Think about Summit League schools. Think about Patriot League, Ivy League, MAC, MMAC schools. They don't have that type of money to share. So those schools may be sharing $200,000 total.
Well, and I think if you don't have football as a school and you're even part of a power conference, it could become an issue. I've heard where, again, we've talked, athletic departments across the country are struggling right now.
Absolutely.
Now, that is largely mid-major on down, but I would argue there are some Power 4 or Power 5s if you're talking basketball, because Big East is basketball only. Are all those schools doing great? I'm guessing not.
That's one of those things.
Your top 4 or 5 may be doing fine, but below that, all of a sudden, it becomes difficult.
Dr. Reynolds has said this way before NIL and all of this stuff. He said you'd be surprised the number of power conference schools that live paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And because they have the same problems as Bradley or Western Illinois or whatever, just on a much broader scale.
We will be back on Upstream Auto Group Braves Plus pregame show on 1470 and 100.3 WMBD. This is the Upstream Auto Group Braves Plus pregame show on 1470 and 100.3. I'm speaking with Joe Messmore, NIL Collective, Home of the Brave, and Mitch Gilfill, an attorney at Quinn Johnston here in Peoria.
Let me give you perspective. At A10, the Atlantic 10 Conference, a good mid-major plus league, all right, borderline high major. Their athletic director, the St. Joseph athletic director, has said, none of our 21 sports generate a profit.
Oh, my gosh.
Think about that. And then she goes on to say a few generate revenue that obviously doesn't outweigh the costs, and they don't even sell tickets to games except for 2 sports. They do not sell tickets to their games except for 2 sports because it's not even worth it.
Right.
The management of just keeping the gate money of all that type of stuff. And so when a blue blood like South Carolina women's basketball loses up to $6 million per year, college athletics is at a threshold of how to sustain moving forward.
Sure.
And it's just not a local issue. This is across the country. Enrollments are down nationwide. Mm-hmm. Tuition costs are going up. Because I'll tell you what, in order to supplement this revenue sharing that schools are doing, you have to find the money from somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not coming out of thin air. So now you're going over to the engineering department. You're going over to the theater department. You're finding ways to cut funds, cut money in order to supplement your athletics program. Because a lot of schools, the athletics program is the front porch to the university.
Well, it's what people see. It's the visual marketing tool, in essence, of that school.
Bradley basketball is the best marketing that Bradley University will ever do. And Bradley basketball winning at a high level,
absolutely,
it exponentially will benefit Bradley.
Because now all your searches, your Googles, everything 100%. All of a sudden starts to go up because of those successes.
This generation understands the Butler effect and what they did in 2010 and 2011 and how that skyrocketed enrollment, which skyrockets millions of dollars coming into the university. And that in turn helps tennis. That in turn helps cross country. And so I think, sadly, the higher revenue earning sports, football or men's basketball, and some schools, women's basketball, get a bad rap, but they are the ones that bringing in the money. So if you statistically look at that from a breakdown, and I'm talking about as a dad of daughters, it's statistically proven those sports keep others alive.
I forget his name, the UConn head coach for years and years and years.
Jim Calhoun?
Jim Calhoun. He was unafraid to talk about this stuff.
You're talking about his interview, right?
His interview. Can you speak to that? Because I vaguely remember it, talking about how, how much he was. I think the conversation is how much he was getting paid versus how much he was bringing in.
The threshold of that conversation had to do with UConn losing money and not being able to sustain certain departments, and a reporter had the nerve to ask him, will you be giving some of your salary back? basically, the millions that he was earning as UConn's head coach. And he snapped back so quick with stats and research and saying, do you understand how much our program is paying for everybody else, not only at this school, but in this state, and how we're helping supplement students and we're helping, provide extra grant money and all those type of things because their basketball program is so successful.
And this is the hard part. And it's an understandable butting of heads between academic and sport. Mm-hmm. At high school level, there's not a lot of revenue, so I understand. College, though, it starts to change because of being the front door, being the marketing tool, what they do to bring in people, not only enrollment, but the money they're able to bring back into the university is misunderstood. And I don't know if there's the reason for it. Could it be jealousy? Could it be the fact that, it's just not understanding and not being communicated well?
It's tough because, you go to games, you go to sporting events, and there are student athletes across all sports that work extremely hard. They also show up at 6 a.m. workouts for the baseball team. The cross-country team, the tennis team, they have long seasons too.
Yes, absolutely.
And so none of this is to discredit or to disqualify them from their ability to play college sports or anything like that. But when it comes to revenue share and money, it's disproportionate for a reason. Mm-hmm. And that's just the reality of it. And the sooner you as a university or a coaching staff can embrace that, the quicker you are to move on, because it will be less emotional to you.
Well, and the hard part is I don't think the hard decisions are done yet. Because number one, you talk about making cuts in the academic side of things, but I can foresee, this is just my opinion, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, where schools start to question the NCAA's rule about having 14 or 16 sports to qualify for Division I. Why do we have to fund 4 sports that we can't make profitable when we have these 6 or whatever number that we can? And we're failing as a university, and now we're failing our student base as well.
Yeah, and then it turns down to what sports ultimately become club sports. Or become intramural sports. And so you take a school out in Mountain West, and one school in the Mountain West has the ability to revenue share up to $20.5 million, and another Mountain West school in the same conference, same league, can only share $300,000.
Yeah.
There's a disparity here. And how can you possibly compete when one school can pay a top 5 prospect $1 million, and another school is struggling to pay them $10,000?
Well, and the thing is, I know this is already happening across some sports, and even at some Power Fives. Have a friend who has a son who's on scholarship, and his sport had to cut down number of scholarships. That was part of the deal. Now, part of that was because of the settlement issue, and walk-ons and number of scholarships went away. But this is also happening not just because you have to, but also because you just can't afford to.
This has become a big business. It's been a big business for a while, and I think the business decision is going to have to be made, and I think the business decision will be that football, the basketballs, and maybe a couple other sports will be the only requirements to be Division I, and the rest will either transition, like Mitch said, to like a club sport, intramural, that type of thing, which still has tremendous value, but it might not be attached to the revenue sharing or a scholarship or whatever.
Or can you have it an NCAA Division I and Division II within the same school where you're lower, the sports that aren't can still participate?
It would be great. I mean, I think even the university in Champaign or any of these schools would love to have more regional conferences for cross country, track, golf, all of those, because it cuts down on travel expense. It just makes sense in a lot of ways, and you're not generating revenue out of those sports necessarily.
Well, it's interesting because to talk about this is, Western Michigan or like Boston University has elite hockey. Elite hockey, competing for national championships. And they're not one of the blue bloods, that you typically talk about when you're talking about these programs, or Johns Hopkins with their lacrosse.
Well, let's go down to warmer climates, beach volleyball. You go to different baseball, different segments where weather has an effect on. They're going to be obviously better in those sports because it's a year-round sport down there.
Totally. And to that point,
or north for hockey.
Yeah, location is so critical.
Absolutely.
When being able to survive. And I don't think any of us are advocating that these sports should go club level or anything like that. But the point is that to be sustainable, to last for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road, when our kids, are now coming up, I think it's just going to be totally different in the future.
Well, this is the Afternoon Auto Group Braves Plus pregame show on 1470 and 100.3 WMBD. It's the Afternoon Auto Group Braves Plus pregame show on 1470 and 100.3 WMBD. Last time out, Bradley finished up its 2-game road trip at Murray State, and unfortunately, it was not a good showing. Murray State had a scare in its previous game coming from behind at UIC. Bradley was coming in fresh off a loss at Belmont. However, in this contest shown on ESPN2, Murray State looked like the hungrier and more desperate team. Bradley's offense sputtered and only managed 31% from the field in the first half. On the other hand, Murray State came out firing. In the first half, they shot 58% from the field and 59% from three-point range, knocking in 10 threes in the first half alone. Unfortunately for Bradley, their defense had no answers in the first half and found themselves down 50-32 at halftime. In the second half, Bradley played better, continued to struggle from the field, and they basically traded baskets for the most part with Murray State for a majority of the second half. The closest Bradley would come in the second half was 14, as Murray State would go on to win easily 86-66. Bradley did have 3 players in double figures, led by Damarian Birch and Ahmet Jonovic with 13, and Alex Hubricks added 11. On the bright side, Ahmet Jonovic was effective inside against a physical Murray State interior. A.J. Smith had his best game in a while with 9 points, 3 rebounds, 2 steals, and an assist. But what is concerning for Bradley is their defense and the lack of consistency. Quote a couple stats. In their 10 wins, Bradley is holding opponents to 66.3 points per game, while at the same time Bradley shooting 47% from the field. In Bradley's 6 losses, they're giving up 80.5 points per game and only shooting 38% from the field. So they're giving up 14 more points in their losses, and they're shooting 9% less from the field. Also, in Bradley's last 2 most recent losses, Jaquan Johnson averaged just 6 points. Bradley's leading scorer coming in was roughly around 18. So based on the stats, it appears that when Bradley struggles on offense, they also struggle on defense. Now, teams are always going to go have struggles within the game, but that is when you rely on your defense to get you through, which has not been the case for this team when there are offensive struggles. The defense has not been able to step up consistently. In fact, I would argue the defensive mistakes are amplified when the offense struggles. Now, I wish it was as easy as singling out 1 or 2 guys to fix the problem, but the reality is there are too many defensive breakdowns by too many different guys. Whether it's getting beat off the dribble, not helping on weak side, or over-helping, or helping with the wrong guy, this Bradley defense has not been able to lock in as a group, and they just seem disjointed. And it's a concern because the same mistakes keep showing up on the defensive end. On offense, finding a consistent third scorer has been the problem. Bradley has some impressive offensive players, but besides Jaquan Johnson and Alex Hubricks, who have been largely consistent scorers for Bradley, it has been a struggle to find that third consistent scorer. I think many of us expected that third scorer to be A.J. Smith, but his offensive game has been inconsistent at best, and he has been in a struggle as of late getting buckets. Now, we have seen signs from Damarian Birch. He's had multiple 20-point games, but he's not doing it every night. Same thing Montana Wheeler, Timo Vandernap. They've shown signs of being able to provide that scoring, but they've not been able to do it consistently. So now we move on to Drake. The Bulldogs are coming off a tight win at home against Indiana State, 74-72. Drake shoots 46% from the field and holds its opponents to 42%. Now, like Bradley, they take care of the ball, averaging only 9.5 turnovers per game. They are led in scoring by number 3, Jalen Quinn, who averages just over 17 points, almost 4 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. For Bradley to be successful tonight, I believe they need to shoot better from the field, and their defense must be better. Well, obviously, right? In my opinion, There is no better way to do that than to create turnovers and get easier offensive opportunities in transition, which has been missing as of late. Up next, Dave Snell has Braves insight before today's matchup against the Drake Bulldogs. This is the Upstream Auto Group Braves Plus pregame show on 1470 and 100.3 WMBD.